responsibilities, and I'm a Sanders, so I mean that's expected, and that's gonna happen. We were at my old house in Prosper, Texas, and then me and my dad were fishing, and then he got mad because I hooked the duck. Fishing helped me just relax, just keep my mind off things, and it's just like a alternate from like the real world. It just helps me just chill, just be laid back. Next year, it's a different me. I'm gonna be a runner and a thrower.
I think we're both the GOAT. When Shedeur Sanders said that as a high school sophomore, the internet didn't hesitate. Clips spread fast. Comment sections exploded. Some laughed. Others rolled their eyes. A few called it confidence, but most called it arrogance. To them, it sounded like a teenager writing a famous last name, trying to claim a throne he hadn't earned yet. But almost nobody stopped to ask a better question. What if that statement wasn't about resume at all? What if it wasn't about comparing trophies or stacking his high school highlights next to a Hall of Fame jacket? What if it was about identity? Because here's the part people forget. When you grow up as Shedeur Sanders' son, you don't get introduced as yourself. You get introduced as a legacy. Cameras show up before you even finish puberty. Every throw gets filtered through someone else's greatness. Every mistake gets magnified. And every success comes with a quiet asterisk. Of course he's good. Look who his dad is. That narrative starts early, and it doesn't let up. So when a 15-year-old looks into a camera and says, "I think we're both the GOAT," maybe he isn't being reckless. Maybe he's planting a flag. Maybe he's saying, "I'm not here to borrow greatness. I'm here to build my own." That difference matters. Because years later, when draft conversations started heating up, when critics questioned his hunger, his attitude, even his maturity, most people judged him based on surface impressions. Swagger, flash, the last name on the back of the jersey. But if you go back to that early interview, the one people clipped for laughs, you see something different. You see a teenager already talking about growth, already admitting flaws, already thinking about pressure, trust, and business. That's not ego. That's awareness. And once you really understand what he was saying back then, the draft narrative, the criticism, even the comparisons to his father, they start to look very different. Because that GOAT comment wasn't a flex. It was a declaration of independence and the foundation for everything that came after. Here, what most people will never fully understand. Shedeur Sanders hasn't just been playing quarterback. He's been playing quarterback under a microscope since he was 14. Imagine being a freshman in high school and the cameras are already there. Not because of your record, not because of your stats, but because of your last name. Every throw dissected, every interview clipped, every mistake amplified. That kind of pressure crushes a lot of young athletes. It creates doubt. It builds insecurity. It makes you play tight. But with Shedeur, something different happened. Instead of shrinking under Shedeur Sanders' son, he pushed back against it. When asked about constantly being compared to his father, his answer wasn't hesitant. It wasn't political. It was instant. It motivates me when people call me Shedeur Sanders' son. I don't like that. I'm my own man. I'm Shedeur Sanders. That doesn't sound cocky. It sounds determined. He wasn't rejecting his father. He was rejecting the idea that his identity would always come second. And that's a subtle but powerful difference. Because every day he walked into practice, he wasn't just trying to win games. He was trying to separate himself. To prove that his arm talent, his preparation, his leadership weren't inherited, they were earned. That's a different kind of grind. Most high school quarterbacks are just trying to start. He was trying to build independence under national scrutiny. And here's the part people overlook. That kind of pressure either builds resentment or it builds drive. For Shedeur, it built drive. But that wasn't the only thing shaping him behind the scenes. There was another layer, one that had nothing to do with football mechanics or highlight tapes. It had to do with trust, and what he realized about relationships at just 15 years old might be the most revealing detail of all. Now pause for a second and really think about this. Most 15-year-olds are worried about homework, video games, and weekend plans. Shedeur Sanders was talking about relationships like a veteran athlete. In that same early interview, he casually said something that almost no one caught. You don't know if people are here just to be cool with you, or if it's a business trip. That's not normal teenage awareness. That's someone who already understands that fame changes how people move around you. When your last name carries weight, you start questioning motives early. Are people supporting you because they believe in you, or because they want access, proximity, opportunity? That kind of realization hits hard, especially at that age. And here, where it gets interesting. A lot of young athletes in that position spiral. They either trust the wrong people or shut everyone out completely. They get reckless. They lose focus. They chase validation. Shedeur didn't. He adjusted. He made everything about business. That doesn't mean he became cold. It means he became selective, focused, protective of his energy. Football became the one space where results were clean. No hidden agendas, no fake smiles, just preparation and execution. And that mindset, that ability to treat everything like business without losing passion, is rare. It explains why confidence doesn't rattle him. It explains why criticism doesn't shake him. It explains why spotlight feels normal. Because while other quarterbacks are just now learning how to deal with pressure at 21 or 22, Shedeur had already been navigating layered expectations since middle school. But here's the twist. Despite all that awareness, despite the pressure, despite the business mindset, he still openly admitted something that completely contradicts the entitled narrative people love to throw at him. He admitted his mechanics were messed up, and that detail might reveal more about his ceiling than any stat line ever could. Here, what critics conveniently ignore. In that same interview, Shedeur didn't pretend he was polished. He didn't act like greatness just flowed naturally because of his DNA. He flat out said his mechanics were off. He credited his quarterback coach, Jeff Blake, for helping rebuild his fundamentals. Think about that. A state championship, winning freshman quarterback, admitting his form needed work. That's not ego, that's coachability. A lot of young stars protect their image at all costs. They hide flaws, they deflect blame, they double down on talent. Shedeur did the opposite. He exposed the weakness and then fixed it. That tells you everything about his wiring. Confidence without correction leads to collapse. Correction without confidence leads to hesitation. He had both, and that combination is dangerous. When he said, "Right now I'm more of a pocket passer," those two words, "right now," matter. That wasn't him labeling himself. That was him identifying a checkpoint. He immediately followed it up by saying he wanted to become a dual threat. He wasn't satisfied being effective. He wanted to be complete. That's the difference between hype and longevity. Good players chase wins. Great players chase upgrades. And Shedeur was chasing upgrade before he could legally drive. But here where it shifts again. Because the pressure he was carrying wasn't just mechanical. It wasn't just about performance. It was psychological. He openly talked about needing fishing trips to clear his head, about needing an alternate from the real world. That's heavy. A teenager needing mental escapes from spotlight pressure isn't normal. That tells you the microscope was already intense. And instead of running from that pressure, he trained under it. Which explains why the bright lights today don't look so bright to him anymore. But the real transformation, the one most people completely overlook, is how he turned that pressure into identity instead of insecurity. This is where the story really gets layered. Most legacy athletes face a choice. Either lean completely into the famous last name, or run from it and try to act like it doesn't exist. Shedeur did something smarter. He embraced the platform, but rejected the label. When people called him Dayan's son, he didn't explode. He didn't disrespect his father. He didn't act bitter. He said, "I don't like that. I'm my own man. I'm Shedeur Sanders." That's not rebellion. That's identity protection. And protecting your identity when the world keeps trying to define you is a skill most grown adults haven't mastered. Every throw he makes gets filtered through Prime's legacy. Every mistake gets magnified because of the gold jacket attached to his bloodline. Every success gets dismissed as privilege. That's exhausting. But instead of letting it shrink him, he used it as fuel. He wasn't trying to be Prime too. He wasn't copying the swagger. He wasn't chasing flashy headlines. He built a different style. Pocket presence, timing roots, composure in chaos, precision over theatrics. That's intentional separation. And here, the key detail, he predicted it. In that early interview, he promised people would eventually see him as Shedeur Sanders, not just Dayan's son. That wasn't hope. That was a plan. Fast forward years later, cleaner footwork, sharper reads, expanded mobility, visible growth every season. That's follow-through. But what makes this even more interesting is how calm he stayed while narratives tried to box him in. No emotional outbursts. No dramatic clapbacks. Just production. And that restraint, that's learned. Because when you grow up understanding that not everyone around you is there for the right reasons, you stop reacting emotionally. You start calculating. And that calculation is exactly what makes his confidence feel steady instead of loud. But the draft process, that's where everything tightened. Because when criticism shifted from high school whispers to national evaluation, it wasn't just about football anymore. It was about legacy, entitlement, and whether he was truly built for the next level. When the draft conversation started heating up, something strange happened. The evaluation stopped being about throws. It became about personality. Suddenly, the buzz wasn't just arm strength, pocket feel, or decision-making. It was attitude, spotlight, swagger, privilege. And if you weren't paying close attention, you'd think this was a quarterback who had never faced adversity. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Because the very traits critics questioned, confidence, composure, belief, were the same traits he built under pressure as a teenager. Here, what evaluators sometimes miss. Talent is visible. Character is layered. You can chart completion percentages. You can measure velocity. But you can't easily quantify what it's like to grow up under a microscope since you were 14. You can't measure what it does to a kid to constantly hear, "Of course he's good. Look who his dad is." That pressure either cracks you or conditions you. And Shedeur Sanders has been conditioned for years. While other prospects experience real scrutiny for the first time during draft season, he's been living in it. Cameras, commentary, comparisons, none of that is new territory. So when narratives turned skeptical, when analysts debated polish or ceiling, he didn't flinch. Because criticism wasn't a shock. It was familiar. That's a different kind of preparation. And here's the irony. The same league that says it wants mentally tough quarterbacks sometimes overlooks the ones who have already proven they can handle narrative storms. Teams analyze mechanics frame by frame, but they don't always analyze identity strength. And identity strength is what keeps quarterbacks steady when everything around them gets loud. Shedeur's confidence wasn't built from hype cycles. It was built from proving himself again and again. Freshman year, sophomore year, college, transfer, spotlight. Visible progression. Cleaner reads. Better footwork. Expanded mobility. That's development, not entitlement. But the deeper layer, the one almost nobody talks about. He was never chasing approval. He was chasing separation. And that mindset is dangerous in the best possible way. Because a quarterback trying to prove he's good enough plays safe. A quarterback trying to prove he's his own man plays with purpose. And purpose scales. Now here, where the projection gets serious. Because when you zoom out and look at the full arc, this was never about a famous last name. It was about whether the mentality forged at 14 can translate on Sundays. Here's the part the league should be paying attention to. The NFL isn't just about talent. It's about turbulence. It's about what happens after the interception. After the media questions your ceiling. After social media turns on you for one bad quarter. That's where quarterbacks separate. And that's where Shedeur's story becomes dangerous, because none of that environment is new to him. He's already lived the storm. The scrutiny, been there since freshman year. The comparisons, nonstop since middle school. The questions about legitimacy, constant. Most prospects experience their first real wave of criticism during draft season. He experienced it before he could drive. That repetition builds endurance. And endurance builds steadiness. When you watch him now, you're not just watching a quarterback throwing timing routes or extending plays. You're watching someone who has learned how to compartmentalize noise. That fishing story from years ago. It wasn't random. It was therapy. It was a teenager recognizing he needed a mental reset from the weight of expectations. That level of self-awareness at 15 is rare. And self-awareness is what prevents spirals. Quarterbacks don't fail at the highest level because they can't throw. They fail because the chaos gets internal. The criticism leaks into mechanics. The doubt leaks into decision-making. The pressure speeds up their clock. But someone who has processed pressure early, someone who has already separated identity from narrative, they don't panic the same way. That's the hidden edge. And here's the part that makes this projection even more intriguing. He's never been satisfied. Even after winning a state title as a freshman, he talked about fixing mechanics. Even after early success, he talked about expanding mobility. Even after national attention, he talked about being his own man. That's a growth loop, not a hype loop. Growth loops last longer because they're internal. And when you combine that internal drive with years of narrative armor, you get something the league can't easily measure. Durability, not physical, psychological. Now the question isn't whether he can throw at the next level. The question is whether the league underestimated what's already been forged inside him. And that brings us to the bigger picture, because when you zoom all the way out, that sophomore quote, it wasn't cocky. It was a declaration of era. Let's go back to that moment. I think we're both the GOAT. When he said it as a sophomore, people clipped it for laughs. They turned it into memes. They called it arrogant, privileged, delusional. But almost nobody asked the right question. What if that wasn't about comparison at all? What if it was about intention? He wasn't stacking his high school stats next to a Hall of Fame resume. He wasn't claiming he had already earned anything. He was declaring trajectory. There's a huge difference. Because when you grow up around greatness, you don't see it as mythology. You see it as routine. You see the preparation, the discipline, the sacrifice, the standard. Greatness becomes normal. And when greatness is normal, your ceiling adjusts. That comment wasn't about ego. It was about expectation. My dad dominated his space. I planned to dominate mine. Two different journeys, two different positions, two different eras. Same hunger. And here's what makes that quote hit even harder now. He followed it up with action. He didn't chase headlines. He didn't try to imitate Prime's flash. He didn't turn himself into a caricature of his father. He built something completely different. Calm pocket presence, controlled tempo, timing routes, field vision, precision under pressure. He didn't try to be Prime at quarterback. He tried to be Shedeur at quarterback. That's identity discipline. A lot of second-generation athletes either lean fully into the family brand or run from it entirely. He did neither. He embraced the platform, but he demanded separation. And that separation has been forming for years. Every season, you could see the evolution. Cleaner mechanics, sharper reads, better command, more poise when chaos hit. That's not hype. That's development, which makes the draft narrative even more interesting. Because when analysts started nitpicking, questioning polish, questioning attitude, questioning flash, they were analyzing surface traits. They weren't analyzing the internal engine. They saw the last name first. They missed the mindset. And that's a dangerous mistake. Because quarterbacks don't last on talent alone. They last on stability, on emotional control, on identity clarity. And Shedeur's identity has been under pressure-tested conditions since he was a teenager. So when people still bring up that GOAT quote as proof of arrogance, it actually reveals something else. It reveals someone who never planned to live small. And that mindset, whether people like it or not, changes how a career unfolds. Which brings us to the final piece. Because whether he surpasses Dan or not might not even be the real question. The real question is the league ready for someone who has been preparing for this stage his entire life? Here, what most people still don't understand. The NFL spotlight isn't new for him. It's just louder. The cameras, he's had them since middle school. The comparisons, they started at 14. The expectations, they've followed him his entire life. So when people wonder how he'll handle pressure at the next level, they're asking the wrong question. Pressure is his normal. The freshman who won a state championship and immediately talked about fixing his mechanics, that wasn't hype. The teenager who admitted he needed fishing trips to clear his head, that wasn't softness. The young quarterback who said he didn't like being called Dan's son, that wasn't disrespect. It was identity formation. It was someone learning early that if you don't define yourself, the world will do it for you. And that lesson shaped everything. It shaped the way he trains, the way he handles media, the way he responds to criticism, the way he separates business from friendship. Most prospects build those traits in college. He built them in high school. That's a head start you can't teach. Now will he win championships? Will he surpass his father's legacy? Nobody can guarantee that. But here's what is clear. He doesn't shrink from comparison. He doesn't run from expectation. And he doesn't panic when narratives turn negative. That's rare. Quarterbacks fail in the league every year, not because they lack arm strength, but because they lack emotional durability. They spiral when doubt creeps in. They crumble when the spotlight intensifies. Shedeur has been navigating that storm for nearly a decade. That doesn't guarantee greatness, but it guarantees readiness. And maybe that's what the "we're both the GOAT" comment was really about. Not arrogance, not delusion, preparation, The real question was never whether he could escape Dane's shadow. The real question is whether the league is prepared for a quarterback who was forged under that shadow and came out sharper because of it. Because when someone grows up carrying expectation and learns how to turn it into fuel, they don't just enter the league. They arrive.